Hi, I'm M.
And my name is Bea.
And this is
Fangirls Anonymous. A quick warning, this podcast is not for kids.
We get into some pretty explicit stuff.
But if you're still with us and into that, welcome.
Hey Bea, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. How about yourself, Em?
Oh my god. I am extremely passionate about what we're talking about today. I know that you know almost nothing.
I know the
about
name.
This fandom. It's a pretty easy name.
I actually only know some of the name. I think that there might be more names that I don't know. I can't even really claim I know the name. Never mind, I know nothing.
Actually, you know the name.
I do.
It's it. You know it. That's
I know
what
that,
it's
but
called.
isn't that not actually the name of any of the characters?
No, the main well, not the main character, but the monster is it.
Oh. So I did know something. I didn't know I knew it. So does that count?
Yes.
Okay.
Anyway, we're doing the second part of our Fandom Exchange. Bea did The Hobbit last week, and this week I am doing It, the It fandom. And we are excited to talk about it. I especially am. I'm very passionate about it. I actually haven't read the book, but I have seen the movies, and they're pretty good. They're pretty good films. So good, in fact, that an entire fandom exploded because of them.
Not to burst your bubble, but that is sort of a low bar.
Very true. Very true. Yeah. Voltron Legendary Defender wasn't that amazing near the end, and there's still fic being written.
I was actually going to take a bullet here and say that despite my love of the source material, the movie franchise associated with my fic exchange was not Fandom Exchange. Was not good in almost any sense.
The first one was pretty good.
The first one
I could rewatch.
Rich with potential.
Exactly, but it did not fulfill it later in the movies.
No.
Oh my god.
But that's an entire video essay that Lindsay Elsa has already done. So.
Three videos on it, and it's hilarious the way she titled it. Oh my god. Have you seen those?
Yes.
You have? Okay, good. Because I've rewatched them a couple times and they're hilarious. Okay, so before we talk about it, which do not worry, we will get into it, I just needed to say we got done with War Children. I'm sure if you guys are listening and you haven't you have not read it, you're tired of hearing the title War Children. Is a really, really good fic. So if you want to read it, please go ahead and read it. That's just a rec just forever. But the next fic club, which you will get tired of hearing as well, is Play It Again by Metasket. We are now doing Hysteric fic. So go and read it, and then send us comments and jokes, and hilarity will ensue when we do an episode on it. Also, we have a Patreon. I just wanted to reiterate that when we hit $100 a month, we will be giving 10% of those $100, so $10, but if we get more, then it'll be more than that. So 10% of that money will be going to a charity that is chosen by the people on our Patreon, and then 5% will always be given to AO3, because we couldn't be a podcast without AO3, and we want to support it as much as we can. Anyway, I thought I would give that to you guys again, just to reiterate it. So, warning. There's going to be so many spoilers for it, just in general. If you do not want to hear those spoilers, maybe don't give this episode a listen. But if you don't care or are in the fandom and you already know these spoilers, then please go listen. This is going to be a really good episode because I am very passionate about this. Okay. So you don't know anything, right? Bea, you don't know anything about this?
As has been evidenced,
story?
No, I know nothing.
You didn't even know what the monster's name was, kind of. Okay. Well, the book itself goes back and forward in time, which is interesting. I've only read the first 60 pages of the book. I have not read the entire book. And I haven't watched the entirety of the original 1990 short series. So in 1990, And in the 90s, Stephen King did a lot of like his own, he directed his own like short series or like movies. They were actually, I think most of them were short series that were like direct to TV kind of shows. And he did It. And Tim Curry played It. And the problem is that Tim Curry is so funny. He's not the scariest person in the world. So along with like
he's not
the low
scary
budget,
in that way.
no, he's not horrific. He's not horrific, I would say.
Okay, so I would be willing to put out there as evidence Tim Curry's role in the movie Legend as the literal devil being horrifying as a counterexample.
I haven't seen that. So let's just put that out there. So it's not like he wasn't a good enough It. I don't think that he was not a good enough It. The problem with the amount of money that they got, so it was kind of a low budget, and it was 1990. So, but 1990 was a different time for horror. So it wasn't exactly as terrifying as like, you know, psychologists have figured out how to make horror movies terrifying that people watch today. Like the horror movies today are just, I think, scarier because we figured out what actually makes us scared with science a little bit more. I feel like that's true. I don't know if that's true, but it feels like that's true. So it's not that amazing. And a good example of the difference between the It fandom from 1990 is that it has like 700 fics on AO3, and the Muschietti films, which just came out, have over 18,000 fics on AO3. So
wow.
Yeah, the difference is vast. The fandom growth was vast. So there you go on that. Andre Muschietti was the director for the recent It films, Part 1 and Part 2. I'm pretty sure that they actually like filmed them back to back. I don't think that they waited a year, which was pretty cool. And the reason why, I'm sure, is because they wanted to have the kids be the same age. So okay. Let me get into the story a little bit, and then we can start talking about the movies just a little bit too. So essentially, bare bones, the story is about a group of kids in a town called Derry in Maine. Obviously, it's a town in Maine, because where else does Stephen King place his towns in his books?
Yeah, I think he might have had one maybe in New Hampshire, but that also might have been a completely different author, and I'm making a mistake.
No, I think that's The Shining, so yes. But that's
still New England.
Yeah, that's still that area. So it's a group of kids who live in this town who have to fight off a maniacal clown. And that rhymed, and I loved it. They name it It, and the monster has been living in this town for generations. It's, well, that they know of. Later in the films, Bea, you're okay with hearing all of this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good, because I'm going into really spoiler territory. This is like the end of the second movie.
Assume that I don't care about spoilers even a little bit.
Perfect. So the clown is actually like a space monster thing that like fell onto Earth and is like terrifying. If you've seen A Quiet Place,
no.
Well, it's the movie is about space aliens that are terrifying too. So this movie is kind of like that, but it changes. The monster itself can change form to bring out. It knows your fear.
So it's a telepathic space monster that lives a very long time in a town in Maine.
Essentially.
Okay.
Yes. And it can, well, okay, so it knows what your fear is, where deep down your fear is. And it feeds off of the fear, but it also actually physically eats kids.
That
and
seems
teenagers.
A little bit redundant.
Yeah, you know,
or at least not good resource management.
maybe it actually doesn't feed off of your fear. I think that that's just something that I have extrapolated because it says like, oh, I love the fear, you know. So, okay, one of the things about the monster is that it comes back every 27 years. It hibernates for 27 years, and then for like a summer, it comes back up ground because it lives in the sewers.
Oh.
It comes back to the ground and like finds kids to eat. it lures them in. I theorize that the reason why it like uses fear is so that it kind of obviously it makes the kids vulnerable enough for him to eat them. You know,
Okay.
this clown could be genderless. It's an alien. It doesn't necessarily subscribe to the gender binary, but
It's a complicated question.
Yes, it is. It makes the kids vulnerable enough with its ability to instill like crazy fear in these children to then consume them physically, literally. The story itself, though it is about a group of kids dealing with a monster, it's really more about like how to overcome your fear as an adult.
Huh.
So there's essentially two parts to the story. The first half of the movies, anyway. I know that the time there are lots of time skips in the actual book. It's not actually part one, part two in the book, but in the first part one of the films, it's just the kids dealing with this in like 1983 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
When they're like 13, and they figure out, because Ben is an adorable little researcher, and I love Ben. We'll get into the characters. He figures out that like every 27 years, another spate of kids goes missing, or another group of people essentially goes missing, and they are ostensibly eaten. You'll float down here too, kind of a situation, because the body parts float around in the cave that it lives in.
Gross.
It's terrifying. It's gross. It's a big tall cave, and it has like a bunch of like toys and old crap, and it's very visually interesting. But
I'm gonna err on the side of this thing just is really bad at resource management.
Yeah, really, really bad at resource management. It's not, I guess maybe we shouldn't have to understand the psychology of a seemingly very old alien. So part one is about the kids, but then part two is them 27 years later, because I mean, at the end of the first part of the film, they fight him, but they don't know exactly if they murdered him or not. And they all, like, with a blood oath, promised each other that if it comes back, they would all come back to fight it. And what's really interesting is that not only is this monster a monster and an alien, but it's also a magical monster alien.
Of course it is.
And it makes them all forget what happened when they were kids.
Awkward.
So, yeah. And the only person who stays is Mike. And Mike fulfills the promise of calling every one of them when he realizes that the kids are starting to go missing again in Derry. And Mike remembers, obviously, so all of them freak the fuck out because, like, wouldn't it suck if you were 40 and somebody called you and they were like, oh, you remember that crazy fucking clown alien thing that you fought in sewers when you were a kid? Yeah, it's still alive and it's back. Like, that's terrifying.
I would honestly probably be like, do I know you?
Yeah.
Like, who are you? And why are you calling my home phone?
They remember, though. That's the thing. Like, for 27 years, they forgot, and then they immediately remember what happened. And what a shock to the system.
Talk about a call to action.
Seriously. So much so that Stan kills himself. Stan, the man, kills himself after the call. We love Stan, and I wish he hadn't died. He shouldn't have died. Let me get into this, but anyway, eventually they do defeat it. Eddie dies, which is one of the people in the ship that we are going to talk about in depth later on. Let's just say that Fix-It Fix are king in this fandom. So I haven't read the entire book. I just recently watched the second part of the two recent films. I watched it like 3 weeks ago. When you're reading fic, I just need to say, I am an example. You do not need to know all of the canon in order to enjoy the fic, because I didn't need to know. I've been reading Reddie fic for like 2 years at this point, so you don't need to know all the canon. But it was good to watch the movie because it gave me just slightly more context about certain points that people tend to put in their fic with Reddie. I just needed to actually tell a quick story. When I was 9, it was a really rainy, dark day, and I was flipping through channels like you do when you're 9 years old, and I found what seemed like an older movie that had kids in it. I was really excited. I was like, oh, it's Stand By Me. Which is another Stephen King novel, which is funny. And I watched some of it, and then on the screen there was this horrific clown character, and I was like, oh my god, this is not a kids movie, this is a horror film. And I ran out of my room trying to find my parents, and it was really dark. It was a really dark day, even though it was in the middle of the day, and I couldn't find my family anywhere. They had all decided randomly, they didn't do this. I had never seen them do this again after this day. They had all decided, my mother, my father, my brother, and my dog had all decided to take a nap in my parents' bed. And I didn't think to check my parents' room because normally it's empty during the day. So it was the last room I checked, and I was seriously freaking out at that point. And I opened it, and all of them were just lying still in their bed. And it scared me until they woke up. And I was like, guys. Oh, okay. Well, I had a near heart attack when I was 9 years old because of friggin' it. Okay, that was the movie. I realized years later that was the movie. Oh, poor little M. I feel so sorry for her. Anyway, let me get into the characters just a little bit. So Bill is, if there was a gun to your head and you had to pick a main character, Bill would probably be the main character because he's kind of, at least in the first film, more integral to this plot because he's the kid. He's a white kid with a stutter, and his brother kind of starts the story. So his brother Georgie, he's just known everywhere in the world to be wearing a yellow raincoat and some galoshes. He gets eaten by it at the very beginning of the story, his little brother, Georgie. Yeah. His arm gets eaten off first, and then in the book, he just dies from blood loss because it's raining heavily. But in the movie, he gets dragged back. So the clown is in a drain, like a street drain. You can kind of see through
the gutter.
Well, it's kind of that little hole that goes into the sewer. A street drain, like a side street drain. It's not like a manhole. Anyway, he gets pulled into that. It's a really, really good little short story if you think of it that way. It's a really good little short story of Georgie dying from this clown. But it's horrific. So Bill's little brother dies, and Bill is obviously affected by that. And he's trying everything in his power as a 13-year-old to find his little brother. He won't believe that Georgie is dead. So that's kind of the inciting action for the rest of the book and for the rest of the movies. And then there's Mike, who is a black kid, and his parents, when he was little, died tragically in a terrible fire. And that's almost essentially what his character is. Like, I wish the black guy had more character depth.
Yeah.
But this is the 80s, and this is Stephen King. Stan, or Stan the Man, or Stanward, or Staniel the Manual, he's the Jewish kid. I wish the Jewish kid and Mike, I wish Stan and Mike had more character development, but yes, Stan is essentially just the Jewish kid. And he's also the one who kills himself before he can see all the rest of the people as an adult. Beverly, or Bev, mostly Bev, she is the girl. She's the only girl.
I'm seeing a trend here.
I know. I essentially wrote this list out as kind of a, what are they to the plot? Like, what stereotype are they? But fic writers are so good at making characters way more conceptualized, like way more complex. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I see the potential here, but I also see the problems.
Exactly. So Bev is the girl who's being sexually assaulted by her father and is having fear about becoming a woman because of that, because he fucks with her head. Yeah, Bev is a rough character to watch as a woman. I wish that there had been at least one other girl. I wish Stan had been a girl, but Ben is the fat kid who gets bullied because of it. And he has a big old crush on Bev, who is classically very beautiful. Ben is also a researcher. He's also white. Bev is too. Stan is too. Ben is adorable. And in the movies, he loves New Kids on the Block. But he also researches the hell out of dairy. I don't know why. I mean, it's because he's lonely. He doesn't really have friends because he's fat. And he's the new kid, which is hilarious because he likes the New Kids on the Block. But yeah, he all over his room is just pictures of, like, Derry, and it's weird. Richie. Okay, we're getting into my favorite characters because I love Richie and I love Eddie. Richie is the funny, vulgar kid and has Coke bottle glasses, and he's tall. Yeah, we'll get more into Richie. Eddie is the hypochondriac with a crazy mother, and he's short and he's angry all the time. And we love Eddie. I love Richie and Eddie with all my little heart. Georgie, like I said, is the Bill's little brother who died at the beginning of the films and the book. Henry fucking Bowers is the very terrifying bully. He's really scary, actually, as a character. And it is the monster that kills Georgie and is a space alien. A magical space alien. So, I will say, just as a short list of top tropes that you find in the fic, and also I guess you could say the top tropes in the show, the films, and the book. It's about fear, and that's kind of it for the original canon. But for the fic, a lot of the tropes are everybody lives, nobody dies.
Good, because I don't actually care much for the let's eat the small child bit of that.
Yeah, we'll get into that, but sometimes a lot of the fic decides that Georgie comes back, and sometimes the fic decides that he stays dead.
Okay, that's fair. It's still an inciting incident, but nonetheless.
Yeah. Sorry about that. It's not even fun to talk about. But it's really good filmmaking. They did a really good job on it. Another top trope is kind of internalized and externalized homophobia. You kind of have to... It's the 80s and they're kids, and Richie is canonically gay in the movies.
Huh.
Yeah. And Eddie desperately does not want to be with his wife anymore. And seemingly is there's actually a really interesting quote that I found from the article titled "Let's Talk About Richie and Eddie" in Chapter 2 from themarysue.com. This is the quote. Stephen King is also a massive fan of this film and reportedly gave an enthusiastic blessing to this subplot, according to Vanity Fair. By this subplot, the Mary Sue means that Richie and Eddie are actually in love. Doberman told the Hollywood Reporter, I think Doberman is like somebody who knows Stephen King, he loved that love story between Richie and Eddie, and that they based the progression of Richie's character on the subtext in the novel. So there's very much subtext in the novel, which I have seen bits on it online, of Richie being gay. It is not subtext in the movie. Richie is definitely gay in the movie. There's subtext in the movie that Eddie is, which is interesting. So, yeah. So a lot of internalized and externalized homophobia in this horrifically homophobic town in Derry, Maine. And then there's a fuck ton of canon compliance / canon divergence. So a lot of AUs just no. There are really not a lot of AUs that I have read that I have liked. It's just a lot of canon compliance, canon divergence. It is a lot of the fic is just them. It's just fix it fix. It's just the authors figuring out how, actually no, all of them survived and Stan is back from the dead.
Good.
Because it isn't a fix it fic if Stan isn't alive, because we Stan. Yeah, it's just essentially a giant amount of fix it fic. How would changing one thing change the ending is also a question that a lot of authors have. Like, what if Henry Bowers didn't escape the mental asylum? Or what if Richie comes back in a time loop, which is actually my favorite fic of all time from Reddie that I'm going to talk about later. But anyway, there really aren't that many too many AUs that I'd recommend, though. You'll see there aren't really any AUs that I recommend. Okay, so do you have any questions, Bea? I know I've been talking a lot.
I just need to take us back about a minute and unpack the mental asylum. We got from terrifying bully to mental asylum, and I'm not sure about the in-between steps.
Essentially, Bowers, through the pushing of it, because it can kind of control your brain a little bit. I mean, he's telepathic. He makes he makes Henry murder his police father. His dad is the chief of police in the town.
Mm-hmm.
So he murders him as like a 15 or 16-year-old. So, and he's kind of crazy. They think he's crazy because he's talking about this like clown. He's not actually crazy, but you know, anybody would think he is. And so he's just kind of in a mental asylum until it is like, hey, I need you to go fuck these adults up now.
Okay.
Essentially. Yeah. So that's why he's back.
In lots of ways, he also, despite his status as a terrifying bully, is also still kind of a victim of the evil space clown.
Literally 100%. But you don't feel bad for him because he literally like cuts into Ben's stomach before he's being controlled by the clown.
So the psychoness is not a symptom, it's just something that may also be a factor.
His terrifyingness was being exacerbated by the clown, I would say.
Okay.
It was bad. It was bad. Yeah, I guess you could say he was a victim as well, because he probably wouldn't have murdered his father if it wasn't for it. But he definitely assaulted Ben. That's too light of a word. He attacked Ben with his friend's help, you know, so. Do you have any other questions before we get into like the ships and talking about Reddie and stuff? Is there anything about the story that I have talked about? Like, is there anything that's like confusing?
Okay, so they, I guess they don't defeat it, but they think they might have, although somehow it's ambiguous, yes. I guess.
Well, they stab him in the face.
That's a pretty good first opening gambit.
And of his own accord, or of its own accord, it goes back down the well where he lives, while like some of his face is kind of floating off. So you're like, if you were a human, you would be dead. If you were even like a magical human, you would probably be dead. But because you're a magical space alien monster thing, you could possibly have survived this. And that's why they made the pact to come back.
Okay. But since they were brain whammied and didn't remember any of this, like,
yes,
do they have to refigure out how to kill it? Or do they just have to figure out something new? Do they remember all of that?
You forget that Mike remembers everything.
Okay,
because he stayed in the town. So
and
they don't have
Mike was the one who was ostensibly the main character? No,
Mike's the black guy.
Oh, okay.
Bill is the older brother who has a stutter, whose little brother got murdered and started the story.
They all have very ordinary names.
They absolutely do. And if you're just starting out reading the fic and you haven't watched the movies a couple times, it's rough. I will say. You're like, who's Mike? Who's Stan? Who's Bill? You know, like, who is who again? But you get used to it pretty quick. It's only 7 kids, but it's also 7 kids, so yeah, but you get used to it eventually. Everybody in the fic really does have their own personalities, much more so than the movies. I haven't read the book all the way, but much more so than the films. Okay, so obviously the top ship is Reddie. People went bananas over Richie and Eddie. Like, they just, and I completely agree, it's a wonderful ship. It is I will talk about why it's perfect, but like, it just suffice to say for right now, it is actually really perfect. And then it is always Ben and Bev. I don't think I've actually read anything in which Ben and Bev are not endgame, because Ben, who was the fat kid, grew up to be incredibly attractive. Yeah, you know, and also rich, insanely rich too, but also really sweet, because he has some humility from being a kid who was bullied a lot. So just catnip to a lot of women and men, probably. Okay, so and then of the other ships in this fandom, essentially, if the other 3, Mike, Bill, and Stan, if they're not in a relationship with another person in the fic, they can be shipped any which way. So it can be Mike, Bill, Stan, Mike, or Bill, Stan. You don't really tend to see them as a throuple, but like, any way that they can be shipped, they will be, kind of. I've seen all of those. So
equal opportunity ship fodder there.
100%. People like seeing all 3 all together all the time, but not as a throuple. That's it, though. It's honestly really easy to ship in this fandom because the source material and the subsequent films, like Stephen King really knew who to put into a relationship in the book and in the show or in the novel. Wow, there are so many different types of media in this fandom. He really knew who to put together because I actually really don't have any beef with the canon couples. I really like Ben and Bev together a lot. They work together. They fit together like a puzzle piece. I like who Mike, Bill, and Stan end up with. Stan ends up with a really nice Jewish girl. Bill ends up with somebody that we don't really get to meet a lot in the movies. I know that something happens at the end with her in the book, but I haven't read the book, so I don't know everything about that. And Mike never got married, which is really sad. He needs to go marry somebody or fall in love with somebody.
And there aren't really any minor characters that get shipped either.
Never.
Weird.
I know. So the characters are really fun, so much so that the fic writers just really want to focus on the 7 kids, and the 7 adults, which is kind of nice. It's pretty insular for a fandom.
Yeah, usually you end up with minor ships of some kind of odd characters.
Yeah. Nope. And if they are actually shipped with another person, it's no C.
Huh.
Yeah, because they're really. So the thing about the story is that all of the good people are the kids, and everybody else friggin' sucks.
Ah.
The entire town is terrible. The entire town is it's kind of insinuated that everybody turns a blind eye to the children dying.
Yeah, I mean, after a certain point, you have to assume.
Well, I mean, 27 years is a long time. It's a different generation.
But as evidenced by the plot of the very movie, if the people your age, 1 or 3 or 12 of them, mysteriously disappeared and nobody ever saw them again, you'd think you would remember that when you, I don't know, were raising your own children and kids started disappearing?
Yeah, I mean, people move in and out of towns all the time.
But it seems like
it made them forget.
Oh, okay, yeah. Fair.
Yeah. Yeah. It made them forget, so that's
it just seemed like one of those insular little traditional towns where you basically have the same families that live there for generations.
You do. It's true. But if you're able to get out, then you forget.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So all of the not awful people left is what you're saying.
Yes. Essentially. Yeah, it's like, it really reminds me actually of a specific side story in American Gods. If you've read American Gods by Neil Gaiman, you'll understand what I mean. I won't spoil it, but go read that book. It's my favorite book. And there's a specific kind of side story in that book that is a lot like this, actually, but in a different way. Okay, so let's get into the meat of the episode. Richie and Eddie, or Reddie, is the main ship of the fandom. And if Ben and Bev are in the fic, they're always together too. I've never seen them not together. So, if they're in the fic and they exist in the fic, then they're together. So that's fun. But the fic is almost always centered on Reddie. And let me just get into to Richie and Eddie a little bit more. Richie is a tall, gangly, nerdy, vulgar kid who speaks in comedic voices all the time and has to repress a fuck ton about himself because he lives in a homophobic backwater tiny town in Maine. And he is canonically gay in the films, and retcon canonically gay in the book, I would say. If you're looking for it, you can see it. So he has a lot of trauma about being himself in this town, not even including a crazy clown. Eddie Casbrack, so Richie Tozier is his full name, and Eddie Casbrack, on the other hand, is a short, incredibly adorable, and incredibly irritable kid who has a mom with, I would consider, undiagnosed Munchausen disease. I will get into that in a second.
Munchausen or Munchausen by proxy? Just curiosity.
What is the big difference between those two?
I would have to look it up. I am not a psychologist, but Munchausen by proxy is where you are faking diseases in your in other people in your life, a la your children or other dependents, as opposed to Munchausen, where you are, I believe, faking it in yourself for sympathy.
It is Munchausen by proxy. And Eddie developed a hypochondria because of it. He's a little hypochondriac because of that. And you would not think that those descriptions of those two characters would fit so well together, but they really, really do. Because they're kind of opposites a little bit. They're like opposites that attract.
Like peanut butter and jelly, kind of an opposite, rather than a like.
Yeah. Rather than like orange and chocolate. Ugh, I hate orange and chocolate. They are absolutely peanut butter and jelly.
So the hypochondriac and the extremely repressed theater gay kid. Okay.
No, he's not theater. The extremely repressed comedic kid.
Mm-hmm.
He's like he ends up becoming a famous comedian. Yeah. So it's just really fascinating to look into that kind of relationship because they're actually perfect for each other. Like Richie is able to calm Eddie down when Eddie is anxious, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Eddie makes Richie have to keep up with Eddie's wisecracks during their like really big conversations / arguments. And it's truly just flirting. But like, and everybody in the group knows this, but it's so good. I consider it one of those kind of just perfect ships because they're just weird enough and just different enough, and they like each other just enough to create this intensely wonderful relationship. If you read the fic, I think you'll understand a little bit more. It's really hard to describe why they're so good together, but it's like fireworks on the screen. Even like in the movies, you can see. It's just so good. It's so good.
They've got chemistry.
Just off the charts chemistry, in my opinion. So all of the fic I'm about to talk about is Reddie fic. And the people listening to this should absolutely go read all of these because I love them. I love all of these. I'm going to reread them someday. Some of them are pretty long, but oh my god. Okay, so the fic. My favorite, most popular that I've read. This is my favorite, most popular. There's another one that I'm going to talk about that is in a different category that is technically more popular because it has slightly more hits and slightly more kudos. But this is my favorite, most popular because, I mean, it is the second one down on the list, but it's really good. The Years Go By Like Days by Georgie Stauffenberg. It's the funniest fic I have ever read. I cry laughed.
High praise.
Yeah. I cry laughed. Georgie Stauffenberg is an evil genius. I don't even have a quote to talk about, and the summary isn't like amazing, so I don't have anything to read for it, but it's long. Essentially it is a fic. It's actually canon compliant. Kind of. It's a little bit it is canon divergence because so they fall in love while they're Eddie and Richie fall in love while they are still living in Derry.
So when they're not necessarily kids, but while they're still
young. They're both 17, I think, when they fall in love.
Okay.
And they decide to both go to the same college to stay together. And yeah, I know. They go to UCLA and they live together as roommates in their dorm and then also in their like future apartments, and they fall in love. They're still in love and they've loved each other ever since they were kids. And fascinatingly, the story, it's like the fic itself forgets the clown. Like it's like the writing itself forgets. It's so good. The way that Georgie Stauffenberg wrote this, it just, you're like, I know what they're forgetting, but they're forgetting it, so they can't remember it. And it's so good. And it's essentially just the story of their 27 years between it occurrences. It's a classic what if fic, and they are able to remember each other because they live with each other. Like, they forget all of the other people, and Bev lives with them for a while, and they're like, why did we forget you, Bev? Because Richie goes on tour because it goes through his career, right? How he becomes a famous comedian. how he becomes a famous comedian. And he finds Bev on tour and is like, oh my god, Bev, I totally forgot about you. And she lives with them for a long time, until the next It occurrence, essentially. They kind of make their own little family. They're not romantically involved with her or anything, but
she's
it's
still
very
part of
sweet.
their found family.
Exactly. And it's just so good. And they adopt a little girl, and it makes me want to cry. Like, I fucking love that fic. It's long, and it makes me really, really happy. And it hit me at a time when I really needed to read something that was happy. So it affected me, and I kept it on my computer on a tab for a really long time just so I could reread certain parts.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that is my favorite, most popular fic. There's a reason why it's most popular, because it's one of those just perfect long fics. It makes me really, really happy. Okay, so the best could only be in this fandom, but is also kind of a good fix-it fic, is Risk Analysis by loserchildhotpants, who I follow on Tumblr, and I didn't realize that they had written this until like 3 weeks ago. Because I have followed them on Tumblr for years, and I read this fic just recently, and I read it and I was like, oh my god, it's loserchildhotpants! I didn't even know that they wrote fic. Anyway, so this is the summary of the fic. Young Richie tilts his head, smirks, and announces, I knew you'd stay pretty. Are we good then? Eddie hesitates, noticing the way Richie's hold has gone strict and hard around his arm again. Good? What do you mean? You have a wedding ring on, young Richie observes cheerfully, pointing at Eddie's free hand. So it becomes legal? People know? Know what? Eddie wonders. Eddie, Richie says too softly, please, stop. We need to leave. We're married, aren't we? The first shoe is dropped, and Eddie watches in shock as young Richie steps aside to show the fresh R+E he's carved into the wood. So that summary has a lot of like specifics from the actual film. The way that you know that Richie is gay is by showing young Richie carving R+E in the kissing bridge in Derry, which is Richie plus Eddie.
Aww.
And the only way, like, one of the ways that you can like show off your like love in Derry as a kid is to like put your initials that way on the kissing bridge. You know, it's very sweet. It's very 80s. In this fic, it's another classic what if situation. So the fic is about there's a particular part in the second movie where it harkens back to a scary part in the first film where he puts these two kids or a couple of people in front of 3 doors, and one door says very scary, one door says scary, and then the third one says not very scary or something like that. And you have to pick one of the 3, and obviously they're meant to be tricks, right? And this person who wrote this fic had the idea or decided to write this fic about what if they had opened one of the doors, walked in, and saw Richie as a young kid, because it's Richie and Eddie going into these doors. And what if Richie was able to kind of get over his fear a little bit, some of his internalized homophobia as a person, because a lot of the other characters got that they got
forced them to face their fear.
Yeah, exactly. He puts them into a terrifying situation and forces them to face their fears, essentially. The only way they can get out is to face them as adults. Beverly and Ben do, and Bill does. None of the other people do. So the author really wanted to have Richie be able to experience that as well. They really do a great job at it. And it's a really wonderful fic. It's just so incredibly specific to the It fandom. Because like this kind of scene, you don't really see it a whole lot. Another fic, I mean, you do see in story a lot of a young person having a conversation with their older self. That's true. But it's so incredibly It fandom-y because a lot of the story is surrounded by these adults having to face their fears as children. And what if Richie got that too? Kind of a fic. It's very good. None of the fics that I'm going to talk about are not very good, but loserchildhotpants is a really good author. I didn't know that. This is just another really good fic that I wanted to talk about that I just read. It's called New Page, Same Old Book by Red Herring, which is technically the highest kudos it fic. So this is the summary. He thought he'd hidden those feelings from himself, stowed them away in some dark corner, and learned not to think about it. But the second Eddie peeked in from around the corner at the Jade and looked at Richie with those big, limpid pools of Christmas orphan meets Bambi, and started rambling about gluten and cashews, it all came flooding back into focus. Richie has loved Eddie so long that it's become an ache that goes beyond reason. This is just one of those cozy up to the fire and read while being sad that you'll never have that kind of love in your life kind of fics.
Aw.
It's so good. It's so good. High recommend. Just go read it. Just go read all of these. It's essentially a fic again, but it's really good.
Is it an Everybody Lives, Nobody Dies, or just we're fixing it because now Reddie?
Eddie lives. I don't think Stan lives, which is really sad. So no, it's not Everybody Lives, Nobody Dies. It's basically Eddie survives what happens to him at the end of the film in this fic.
Okay.
And he, about a year after that all happens, he leaves his wife, because he is married. He leaves his wife and he finds himself at the doorstep of Richie. And it's kind of them figuring out the internalized homophobia that they've experienced their whole life. Because, think about it, this is the 80s. Eddie's mother is Munchausen by proxy, and Eddie's a hypochondriac because of it. AIDS was everywhere, and every hypochondriac was terrified of getting AIDS at the time. So that can really fuck you up if you were gay at that time.
Yeah.
I imagine. And authors like to get into that sometimes. So yes, that's kind of part and parcel of the fic. Let's get to my favorite fic, and the last one. Hit Me Baby One More Time by the Apple Pie Lifestyle. Hit me baby one more time. So good. I've learned so much. This is the quote. And before I read The Years Go By Like Days by Georgie Stauffenberg, before I read that one, Hit Me Baby One More Time was the funniest fic I read. It was definitely up there. I forgot to say that the Edward Norton scene in The Years Go By Like Days is actually the funniest scene I've ever read. Like, just kind of ever, I think. I don't think there was a funnier scene I've read in a book. I was weeping tears. It was so funny. But okay, back to my favorite fic. Mm-hmm. Hit Me Baby One More Time by the Apple Pie Lifestyle. Let me read you the quote. So I'm in a time loop, he says, after he feels himself finish saying the usual shit about the clown. He runs through the explanation. It's gotten much more streamlined since the first time, and makes them believe it through handy shit he's picked up in his travels, i.e. things he's made them confess in past loops for this very purpose. Lot of embarrassing sex stuff and overall trauma that they definitely wouldn't have told anyone, let alone Richie, unless the time loop was true. In any other situation, it'd be funny, but Richie's really fucking tired. How many times have you done this? Mike asks. Around 50, Richie says. Around 50? Hey, you lose count, Richie says. It's not like I can keep a tally chart. I tried. Shockingly, it wasn't there when I reset. The others wait. When Richie doesn't continue, Bev says, so what should we do? How the fuck should I know? Richie walks over to the stairs and sits down on the bottom one, splaying his legs out. I've tried everything you've all suggested, except for saving Eddie's life, but that's because I can't, not because I haven't tried. Woo! Chef's kiss! Chef's kiss. Chef's kiss. It's so good. 10 out of 10 would recommend this fic. I adore Groundhog Day stories. People don't write them often because they're kind of a, like, you've read one and you know it kind of thing. But for some reason, I could read a Groundhog Day story just anytime. Like I love Happy Death Day, those series of films. I adore those movies, actually, because, like, I love that kind of story. I love seeing a character grow and change over the same exact experiences, and then one decision shifts it and they're finally out. I love that kind of story. But it's also just really fun to read. Like, it's just like, it's kind of relaxing to read because you know what's going to happen a little bit. It's like for you, Bea, like the time travel fix it AUs, your potato chip. Groundhog Day stories are kind of like my potato chip a little bit. Actually, no, Hurt Comfort is, but I'm a whore for Hurt Comfort. So,
This is secondary. It's not your primary potato chip, but
yeah.
if it was placed in front of you at a buffet, you would not pass it up.
Yeah, it's like barbecue potato chips. Sea salt and vinegar potato chips are my favorite, but these are barbecue potato chips, and I wouldn't pass them up. So this is my favorite Reddie fic of all time, and it does happen to be short, which is kind of weird for me because usually I read the fuck ton. I just read the fuck out of like really long fic. You all know this. But this fic is hilarious and heart-wrenching and has some of the best Hurt Comfort this side of the Mississippi. And I picked up a specific phrase from this fic, and the phrase is, "this time with feeling." I love it. I love that phrase. It's so directorial, but like funny when you don't want to actually do what you're doing. It's now just a phrase I use. And when a fic affects your life in that way, in some little small way like that, it always stays with you. Like, oh yeah, I found that phrase from that specific fic that I loved. You know, like, it's just, sometimes fics just affect you in that way, and it's good. It's just that good. The Apple Pie Lifestyle is a wonderful author. You buy that Richie is in a time loop. Like, it's a perfect characterization. And it's Hurt Comfort all the way, baby. And also the title is so good. Hit me baby one more time makes me so happy. The title is so good. Oh my god. Well, that's my favorite one. I am really sad that we're probably not ever going to talk about Reddie again. This is, it's just one of those underrated, like under the radar kind of ships where, yes, it's two characters from kind of a weird horror story from the 80s. But somehow they kind of have the feel of an archetype, these two characters, but they're definitely not. They're not archetypes from horror genre. Like, where else are you going to find two people where one is a tall, gangly, nerdy, vulgar kid who speaks in funny voices and is repressed, and another one who is short and adorable and really mad all the time, who is a hypochondriac? Like, those are very specific types of characters, but somehow the relationship feels archetypal. I don't know why. It's really refreshing seeing 40-year-olds fall in love in fic, because a lot of time they're like, I don't know, 18.
Yeah, maybe we're getting older, but I've definitely noticed lately that I'm leaning more and more towards the, how about adults falling in love quietly as adults together thing is definitely holding some appeal.
I don't know necessarily if it is because we are getting older. I think maybe, yes, that's part of it. I think it's also just different enough, because so much fic out there is about very young people falling in love, and when you are able to find a ship about older people, like Zerafall and Crowley, they're older people and they're falling in love in those fics, and it's so lovely. Like, it's really, really, really nice reading fic about two people that are very firmly themselves falling in love. And that's what age does to you. You're very firmly yourself. You figure out who you are. When you're young, when you're in your teens or early 20s, you don't necessarily know who you are quite yet. And falling in love can be messy because of that. But it's not messy in that way when you're reading an older couple. It's really nice. It's just not as dramatic. It's not as emotionally taxing for the reader. It might be interesting actually to do an episode about that. Anyway, that's enough about Reddie, even though I don't think there's ever going to be enough about Reddie. I hope that the people who are listening to this have enjoyed me talking about this. I hope you have too.
I have certainly learned a lot, and I am definitely intrigued by the opportunities presented here.
God, please. if there's one fic that you should read, I know you like shorter fic. Well, no, you like long fic too, but I know that you like reading shorter fic first, right?
I am all about quality. Convince me to read something longer.
Oh.
Sell me on it.
Okay. Then you should read The Years Go By Like Days, because that is some quality ass fic right there.
Awesome.
It's so good, and it's really long.
Okay.
It's like over 100K. It's worth it. I was bereft after I read it because I couldn't read it any longer. Anyway, read The Years Go By Like Days, and if you want a shorter fic, then read Hit Me Baby One More Time. Okay, I think we're done.
So I guess we'll see y'all next week on
Fangirls Anonymous. Bye!